Tim Goldstein, autistic adult, and your host for Life in a Neurotypical Universe, where we take a look at life from the perspective of an autistic adult. Well, everybody, welcome again to the podcast of Life in a Neurotypical Universe. And today we have Theo Smith. And Theo has a couple of websites, Neurodiversity by Design, Neurodiversity at Work. He's also the author of a book by the same title. He also is the creator of the top neurodiversity evangelist list, which was something pretty interesting. And with all those things, Theo, what can you tell us about yourself? I'm dying to know of your connection to neurodiversity. What is it that sucked you in and got you involved in this crazy pursuit that we're all going after? And also just tell us about your efforts. I mean, obviously writing a book. I know you had an amazing co-author that you worked with. I'm sure that was inspirational and educational. Maintaining multiple sites, a podcast. You're like all in. So tell us, man, what's the deal? How do you keep up with all this stuff?
Tim, thank you so much. It's really nice to be here and chatting with you. And I kind of you've done a lovely introduction there. Probably some things that I forget that I do or have done or I'm doing, but that's quite common in terms of my neurological makeup. Anyway, forget where I am, where I'm supposed to be, and what I've been asked to do. I'm Theo Smith. I'm based out of Cheshire in England, in the United Kingdom, but I'm originally Welsh. I'm from the Welsh Mountains, where there's more sheep than people, about 4 times as much, in actual fact.
Okay, so I just have to ask you, being an American,
yes,
which means, A, we're totally ignorant of like most anything in the world outside of America. How far distance-wise is the Welsh area that you came from to where you are now? Because it always blows us Americans away when you talk about these, like it's a totally different place. And we think that's no further away than the next city in our own state. So how far is it?
Well, yeah, exactly. Like if you're thinking about the US, it is probably, as far as you could throw a stone, it is where Wales is from where I live. I'm an hour's drive into, the land of my fathers. Wales is not the biggest place in the planet, but it is a very, very beautiful country and one which I think kind of feeds into the way that I think and the way that I am. It's a country that's rich in poetry and in music and song and in a level of creativity that I think just plays naturally into my soul. So but that's I'm a Celt by if we're really to dig deep, I'm probably a Celt, but with a unusual makeup of many Europeans over a long period of time. And I'm sure there's something in that genealogy that plays into the neurological makeup as well. But I am not the expert to talk about that. By trade, I'm a recruiter. I've been an actor. I'm a failure in the education system, although some might say the education system failed me. I have struggled in many areas of my life, where I have focused on the things that I enjoy and the things that give me energy, then I've been fairly successful. And I think one of the biggest lessons that I've taken from this journey of discovery around the concept of neurodiversity, for me, is that when you stop allowing others to determine what you do and how you do it, and you grab a hold of your own destiny, and you start to, I talk about kryptonite in your life, when you start to eliminate the kryptonite from your life, then you're able to lean into your significant strengths, superpowers, however you want to define it, right? But you're able to do the things that give you power. And so often we allow others to define what we do and how we do it. And they don't always have the best intentions, not because they want to hurt us or harm us, but because they want us to do the things that feels right to them. And often that's not the stuff that is good for us, not good for our mental health and well-being, not good for our energy levels, not good for our ability to be our best selves. And unfortunately, it's a continuation of us having to mask and therefore not be the person that we need to be productive in this world. So that is kind of a little snapshot into my kind of belief system around the power of this incredible concept of neurodiversity.
You know, I saw when I was looking through some of your stuff, which I didn't get through all of it because there's way too much stuff there to look through. But I saw that your background education-wise was drama, right? I mean, which is, I think, pretty cool because most people who are dealing with neurodiversity don't seem to come from the arts. We like to always think that we're all technical geeks. I'm definitely a technical geek, but that doesn't mean that we're only technical geeks. So I love the idea that you're bringing in a very unique perspective besides your own background and such, coming from that more creative field versus coming from the, we'll say, a little more rigid fields of the technology world. So it sounds like just from the description you gave, that certainly has played a big part into, you know, coloring who you are and the way you go about doing things.
So let me blow your mind because you just said something that fascinates me. And I think it's understandable because you're coming from your view, your perspective and how you see it. And others will be sat there feeling exactly the same way. Almost like, how can somebody be in the arts, be an actor, be maybe perceived to be confident, and be autistic or be dyslexic or be ADHD or whatever else it may be neurodivergent or neurodiverse, depending on your preference terminology. How can that almost be possible? But in actual fact, what we now know is many prominent actors are coming forwards and identifying as being ND. So Anthony Hopkins is one incredible example of somebody who in later life recently identifies as being autistic, being on the spectrum. And when you think about probably, and he's Welsh, by the way, so I'm getting in a Welsh actor, but you all might know Anthony Hopkins because obviously he is world renowned for incredible roles that he's played over a long period of time. But he, when you think about an actor, I like to bring things back down to a base level. And I think that maybe that's where my community exists, right? I talk in a way that people understand because I'm not an academic. I did go to university, but I went as late to university with no formal qualifications as a mature student. And I did drama because the barriers to entry for drama are very low. I also did drama because for me, my mum, when I was getting into a lot of trouble as a young person, she found it as a good mechanism for keeping me out of trouble, or at least getting me off the streets. And what I found, it was a way for me to be somebody else. It was a way for me to rationalize some of the stuff that was going on in my head and talk about issues that maybe I couldn't talk about, that you can't talk about. Who do you talk about it to, right? But you can in performance. You can be a character that is not you, and that is acceptable. In a safe space, in a theatre, nobody is going to say, Theo, you can't be this type of person, or you can't be that type of person. I can be anybody I want in that safe space because that's what it's there for. I found improvisation very powerful because it allowed me just to immediately explore. We only just recently talked to him about going to an event, and being at that event may for some be difficult. If you're on the spectrum or if you're ND, you may find it difficult, or you may find it empowering. But at the end of that, all your energy's gone, right? You used up all of your spoons, all of your energy, however you want to define it. So that the creative arts for me was almost like therapy because it allowed me to get a lot of stuff out of my head, but it also gave me value where I had zero value elsewhere in the education system. I had little value there, and there's always trouble. And I didn't turn up to places I thought I wasn't welcome, so I stopped turning up to school. But the drama was my therapy. Drama was my community. Drama was the place where people accepted me and allowed me, and actually where people valued my energy and my ability to do stuff in that space. And then if you translate that to somebody like Anthony Hopkins, okay, right? So think about the impact that it had on me. Now think about the steps you take to perform in a role. So the steps you take to perform in a role is you get a character, right? You start to read the script. You start to think about where that character came from, their background. You research, right? You hyper-focus into the level of research that you go. You become obsessed about that character. You become obsessed about their interests, where they come from, what they did, what they liked to eat, who they hung out with, what they did. This makes for a very good character actor. Somebody who can really get into the underneath the skin of what it is to be that human being. And imagine being somebody who's never felt like they fitted in and never felt like people saw them for who they were, right? They saw them for who they felt they should be. Well, that kind of, to me, just plays to the idea of being an actor, of being able to utilize all those feelings and emotions of lack of acceptance or understanding and push that into the research of a character, and then the high levels of hyper-focus and energy that some people, not everybody, some people like me get. I'm not going to become Usain Bolt, who's ADHD, and I'm not going to break the 100 meters record. Right? I'm never going to do that, but I do have really high levels of energy, and that comes out in the way that I talk, in the way that I move, in the way that I think, but it does mean that I crash and burn, and therefore, again, coming back to the acting, that played to my strengths because you could put a ton of energy in and then that night's done and you can go to bed and wake up an hour a day before you go and do 2 hours of performance again. You go at it and then nobody asks anything. But you have to go through a whole process of research, understanding, character. Problem I had was with learning lines. So often I'd be making up lines in Shakespeare, which isn't good, by the way.
William would have fired you for that.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, exactly. They're like, you cannot make up Shakespeare. Like maybe some people can, but so there are challenges that come with it, right? But so for me, the arts, music, poetry, coming back to my origins of coming from Wales, these for me are like an integral part of our ability to make sense of the world. If we can't make sense of it via others, via what we see in environments, and that can drain us if we can't make sense of the world. So that's what I found the arts really powerful. And then I left the arts, like many of us do, because it's tough to get a job. So, and I don't just mean we all leave the arts, we all leave something we might be passionate about, because ultimately we get fired a lot. I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of jobs.
Bingo. That's why I wrote a book on interviewing, because I had to interview so many times that I got really good at it. So, yep, been there, done that.
Exactly. See, so that's it. We fail a lot. It can hurt a lot. And some people never find a way through. And you know, this is the 90% of people on the autism spectrum in the UK. I'm sure the stats in the US are not too dissimilar, are currently out of work after the pandemic. It's had a greater negative impact on people's ability to stay in jobs and then to get back into jobs. Because if you've been in a job for 10 years and not had to interview, and the interview processes are not made for you, then let me tell you, if you lose that job, it's going to be a real challenge to get back through the process, get back into a job. And your confidence levels will diminish, will go, especially if you're ND. You may be hypercritical of yourself, less able to talk about your strengths and where you've achieved things, even though you'd struggle to be able to communicate that. So I went on a journey of doing many jobs, and recruitment is where I found some level of skill that was acceptable, that got me to where I am today, which is now advising organizations around neuroinclusion within their recruitment processes, but across their wider organizations, advising tech companies of the same, and just helping people, right? Because my daughter, it took us 4 years to get her diagnosed with autism or as autistic and ADHD, and also dyslexic and with dyscalculia, probably dyspraxia, this complexity of the human mind, right? But those labels have allowed us to get her additional support. She's very similar to me. I just didn't get the support, and I think she deserves the support. And I think people across the world deserve the support that they've not been getting. So I do everything through the lens of a dad, but also through my own lived experiences of the challenges and stigma that I faced. And I now use my position of influence as a recruitment leader of some key organizations within that community, influencing HR leaders and recruitment leaders but that has now elevated to board members, CEOs, to really help them get their heads around what we're talking about here and the positive impact that they can have on other people's lives, which I think is critical. And I really see neurodiversity as the future of this planet, not just the future of organizations, of hopefully transforming politics from some of the challenges we faced globally recently, but also climate change, right? We need activists, we need scientists. To your point, we need technologists. We also need poets. We also need musicians. We need all of these people, and we need people who represent the ND community because they see things in a way that we require, not just in a way that's different, in a way that we require for the future sustainability of this planet. And if we disengage those voices and we don't want to understand them, we put the planet at risk. And I think that's what I'm really passionate about, is advocating through the book, through my podcast, through my communities, through my newsletter, through LinkedIn, through my video. Everything that I do is about trying to push the boundaries of understanding beyond what has been a little micro bubble up until the last 12 months, I would say.
You know, there's a huge amount in there to unpack. The first thing is just talking about, as you said, Anthony Hopkins coming from the entertainment industry. And there's many people in the entertainment industry that Eminem, singer, is autistic. Dan Aykroyd, comedian, is autistic. And we could go on with just naming names. It just keeps on going. I think, unfortunately, the Autism at Work efforts that were started back in 2014, 2015 kind of range by some of these major corporations that I know the people very well. They're great people. They're wonderful people. And a lot of them have changed their minds on how they think about it. But unfortunately, it's been communicated so much that if you're ND, you're going to be technical. And I think it's a total mistake. I mean, we're trying to force people into a perspective that isn't. I know I was talking one time with Dr. Dave Cadell at Vanderbilt, and he's autistic and runs the Frisch Center of Autism and Innovation there. And what we came to the conclusion was probably 15 to 20% of autistics are cut out to be computer programmers and technologists, and probably 15 or 20% of neurotypicals are cut out to be computer programmers and technologists. But again, I just think it was the publicity that has really obscured the fact that just because you think differently than, quote, the norm, you're going to be in technology. The reality is you can be in any field. I was in sales for years and years. That's why I got good at interviews, was because I was in sales. And when I think back about it, I never really continued pursuing it, but I actually used to be involved in doing plays and drama in school, and I was involved in band, and actually tried joining the military, playing a lead fife in a Revolutionary Fife Corps. And I was dropped because I had psoriasis. But boy, the parade unit, that's going to really wipe you out if you have psoriasis. But at any rate, that was my attempt. And from then, I then kind of turned more towards a technological bend. But the reality is, yeah, deep in my history, there was a lot of artistic kind of thing. And I think it comes through for me also, because I'm like you. I recognize that explaining things in technological jargon and gobbledygook doesn't help the average person understand anything. It might make you sound like you're important to yourself, but it doesn't convey understanding. You've got to put it into just normal talk, normal speak. And I think that's even harder, taking complex things and putting them into simpler ways to communicate it, which, as you say, that's the way you bring it across, is a way that the average person can get the story. So I guess just obviously you're involved a huge amount now as a recruiter. So certainly for more than familiar with the Autism at Work efforts and such. Just I don't know, I always think about there's really two paths that are developing as I'm seeing it, and they haven't joined together yet. There's the Autism at Work efforts, or now Neurodiversity at Work, they're labeling them, but they're truthfully mostly autism, even though they put neurodiversity in the name. And they're essentially trying to do everything on their own. They're trying to make the company be able to fully support an individual that would normally not fit into the company well. On the other hand, there are groups and organizations that work from the job force readiness standpoint of teaching the social skills and nuances, along with usually some job skills also. That is maybe just depending upon the person's educational background. How do you see between those two as far as where are we going to end up with companies trying to do it all on their own versus trying to teach the individuals how to participate in a company? And I know I just heard about, and I can't remember what the name of it was, but I was talking to a group in California that does education to employers to help them understand about hiring, particularly autism they're focused on. And they were taking a study that was really saying we shouldn't teach people at all anything that's not in their strengths. We should just focus on their strengths, which to me, that's going totally the other way. I think that there's some give and take. Might not be 50-50, might not have the capability of 50-50, but if I can handle 30%, I better own that 30%. So now I've said way too much. What's your thoughts?
Wow. So, I mean, I agree with you. This is the thing. This is a big topic, right? Because you're right. When we look at that and you think of how long ago some of these Autism at Work programs started, you think, wow, like 10 years, as you mentioned, possibly some of them or longer. And some of them came out of good places, right? Which is organizations like Specialist and, providing in consultants into organizations that can solve problems. And they're on the spectrum. And then organizations realizing, I guess, like Microsoft and a number of other organizations are going, well, hang on a minute. These are incredible employees. Like maybe we should have our own program around this if these consultancy primarily focuses on autistic talent. And therefore they've built out their own models. The challenge we've got, like anything at this scale, is it's a drop in the ocean. If you hire 50 people on the autism spectrum and you put them in an office that's in Australia, for example, and they only have managers who've been trained to work with them and, everything is structured around them, what happens when they want to get promoted? What happens when they want to go to a different office in a different part of the world? What happens when any number of issues or challenges that come around that piece, they're limited, right? They're limited by these four walls in this box. And the upshot is that we can learn some things if we put projects like this in place. But if we never take them beyond that project phase into the wider workforce, that's where I feel that we have a problem. Now, where I'm seeing things that are really kind of getting my interest and really starting to make me think there's some significant opportunities here is, the reality is 99.9% of organizations in the US, small to medium sized enterprise, right? 99.9% of organizations. That's fairly significant. The same in the UK, EU is like 99 something, right? So we're just saying that globally, small to medium sized enterprises make up a lot of organizations. They only actually represent then something like just under 40 or 50% of the workforce though. So even though they make up 99.9% of organizations, it's only about half the workforce they make up. So I mention these figures because they're important, right? Because sometimes we get so focused on some of the big organizations, whoever they may be, who've done some good work. But in reality, some of the organizations that are making really big, impactful change are doing it because they're doing it organizational-wide, right? They're not doing a program. they're literally making changes that impact every single employee and positively, and they're doing it at speed, right? And they're also growing at speed because of the level of investment and because of the type of organization now. Talking about, startups, scale-ups, unicorns, organizations that are literally going woof. So they're going through a number of different phases of transformation very rapidly. And the great thing is there that the barriers to entry for talent in the ND space seem to be a lot lower because they've not been built over 50 years, right? The organization is building the plane in flight. They're building the plane in flight, right? So they have to learn quickly. And yes, they'll make some mistakes and they might lose a wing on the way. But ultimately, they are literally at speed having to deal with these issues. So the great thing about that is we are learning really quickly from those organizations I'm working with around the both positive and negative impact for all talent within an organization, but specifically ND talent, and where they've been stigmatized or marginalized or system impacted negatively, just because the way that they think, you can start to consider those and make changes. And in those types of organizations, the types of changes you can make there, you can make it scale through other organizations. So those learnings can be impacted. Much harder for that organization to learn from IBM or to learn from a bank or a EY unless they EY are dropping in to provide that consultancy and advice. But to learn from their experience is much more difficult because you're talking at companies at such different scale that, they're everything about the way that they work and engage, and it's just in different planets. And so for me, that is where I get really excited, not to discount what they're doing, because it is important work and they do need to go on that journey, and they will be able to share some of those insights in future. But these other organizations, and there's many of them, they can make different impacts across people in all areas and facets of life, not just, to your point, where they get hyper-focused on this tech talent or talent in AI or talent in data science, whatever it is. Because if you get an autistic person who's good at that, they'll be incredible. That's lovely, but that's one autistic person who may well have got a job anywhere in the world anyway because they're absolute brilliance. You've just managed to get them for your organization. So what I'm seeing is I'm seeing evidence there that this could be incredible in terms of the speed of our understanding. The danger, though, caveat, the danger is that because of the speed that they move and because of the level of changes in leadership, in ways of working, practices, is they equally have the opportunity to get this really wrong at a rapid pace as much as they do to see the opportunities to really make a positive impact. I think that's what organizations that one website that you mentioned is Neurodiversity by Design, where I highlight wonderful people in the community, people who do similar work to me, but in all different spaces, people who don't, people who work for organizations, but people who are championing neurodiversity. The reason why I considered Neurodiversity by Design is because I want organizations to think about inclusive design. I want them to think about starting today making their organizations neuroinclusive. Because otherwise it's going to be too late when they've gone through the fourth round of funding and transformation. When the people who were employees 4 years ago are now senior managers, and we didn't consider the journey they were going to take, and therefore they're not prepared to deal with the variety of wonderful neurological diverse talent that they now have, whereas they had less rigor to the processes and it was easier for them to take an individual approach. So these are the markers that I'm seeing, the lessons that we can learn from what's now happening within this space. I think it's exciting, but we don't want to blindly go into a situation where we're going to harm ourselves and the community.
I think you really hit on something very important here. And when we look at the models within the companies, what you were describing in the smaller companies, I would refer to as being, if we put it in the big company terminology. It's a DEI effort. It's a diversity, equity, inclusion effort. In other words, I like to think about being neurodistinct, which is the term I like to use because, hey, I feel better being distinct than being some of those other weird things. But if we get companies to look at being neurodistinct as being a culture, just like the LGBTQ plus is a culture. Now, in the LGBTQ plus culture, do we recognize that there's subcultures that are very different from each other? Well, we darn well better recognize there's subcultures that are very different, but we recognize they form a culture in a larger group. And I think a lot of major large companies have done a pretty good job of gaining acceptance and recognition that there's a culture of humans here that bring talents and skills, just like any other group of humans brings talents and skills. And what has happened, I think, is these Autism at Work programs have essentially been hiring efforts. We're not going to teach the company how this culture is different so we can relate to it, so we can integrate them, so we can understand them. We're just going to hire them. And as you say, we're going to put them in their own, different companies, different ways. Some do center of excellences and you're trapped in the center of excellence. Friends at a very big name company you named, I know the leaders, they're wonderful people. They're doing great stuff. They care. But I think their model is nothing but a high-tech sheltered workshop. You're stuck. And I see very few large companies, although it's starting to move. I work for a major tech company, and we're in the process of trying to redesign what was a work program into a DEI program and get people to understand. And I like to look at neurodiversity as a culture, just like I like to look at the medical world as a culture. And that way we don't have this, is it medical and these names? Or no, there's different cultures. And if I need to have my cancer cured, I want to go to the medical, go fix it culture. We need to diagnose it and fix it. On the other hand, when I'm talking about my different way of perceiving, processing, and thinking as an autistic individual, I don't need them to try and fix me. I think I'm perfectly fine. I like to look at it then through the lens of the neurodiversity culture, where we recognize that there's all different perspectives that we can bring to it. And based upon how we perceive, process, and think, we bring different perspectives. And those perspectives have just as much value as hiring women, as hiring people of color, as hiring people from all different other cultures. So to me, I think what I really got out of what you were saying was what these small companies are doing without calling it DEI, because they just generally don't call it that. They're weaving it into the fabric of the company, the fact that there's going to be individuals who perceive, process, and think, which mean interact also, in a different manner. And that's okay. That's normal, as long as it's respectful. Obviously, you can't cross over the line of not being respectful. But as long as you're respectful, there's nothing wrong with coming from a different angle. In big companies, we call that DEI. And I think that's really where we need to shift to, is exactly what you're seeing in the smaller companies. Well, just put it in the DEI department. They're the ones who have been working for years to teach us about other cultures and acceptance of other cultures. So I loved how you illustrated it in the smaller companies, because they're doing it without even knowing the name DEI. There's no DEI officer in there. They're just doing it as, this needs to be how the company sees it, that these are just other workers. They're bringing cool, unique perspectives, and we're going to make value out of those perspectives. I always like to say, to me, I feel like I belong. And I think belonging is a big piece. I think that's one of the keys, is you've got to feel like you belong. Belonging is when the group, whether it's a meeting group or larger group, whatever, will consider my idea as if it potentially could be right. Not that it is the right idea, but they'll at least stand back and consider it, even though it might sound wacky at first, and go, well, let's look at that. Take Elon Musk. Landing rocket ships. I mean, the best NASA scientist said, can't do it, never will work. I don't know, I think he's 150 or 60 or 70 in a row. He's done pretty good with them. So that's what I'm saying is, at least you evaluate it like it could be right, even though it's very different from your own perspective. And I think if we can get companies to look at that way, that is really inclusion. No matter what group you come from, you're female, you're of color, you're from a different country, you're of a different religion, different whatever, different political party. That doesn't mean you can't have an idea that's the right one for this solution that we need today. And I think too often we have these rigid boxes of, the solution, this is how we do things here. It's got to fit in this box. And we throw out, and this is just to me the funny part, we go out of our way to hire a range of diverse talent. And so far, neurodiversity hasn't been part of most companies, but they do work in other ranges of diverse talent. And then the first thing they do is ignore all the diversity they just brought in because it's not the perspective of the company. So I don't know, enough of my tirade on it, but you certainly hit on one of those things. You brought it up through a different manner, but I'm with you that it's got to become part of the fabric of the company. Otherwise, you've limited the opportunities of the individuals. They can't move into management. They can't move into other positions because that's it. We only know how to handle you over here where we've trained managers to deal with you. Well, why don't we just train everybody to accept that people are different? And if something doesn't seem right to you, ask, because probably you're not understanding what really is being conveyed.
Yeah, I think it's a lack of understanding for sure is one of the biggest problems that we have. And it's through communication that we can have better understanding. And we have too little communication. And if you go back to some of these organizations that are smaller, that may be having stand-ups more often, every day, they're communicating more, they're chatting more, therefore they're seeing some of the challenges more, they're able to identify where there's problems. The bigger, the more complex the organization, the fewer conversations you might have, the lack of interaction you may have with people. And it doesn't need to be, face to face. It's any kind of interaction where you're directly connected with the work that somebody else is doing. And they're connected with what you're doing. And therefore, you've got enough touch points where you can see the problems, right? When you start to dilute those, you don't see as many of those challenges and problems. And therefore, when problems do come up, they can be explosive. And that's where you then need the structure and rigor and DE&I consultants and leaders. And you've got to put all these mechanisms in place, because person A might come into contact with person B for the first time, even though they both worked there for 2 years. And they've come into contact, and one likes data and is quite analytical and is quite focused on everything being exactly where it should be. And the other person doesn't like to be ruled by data. They may appreciate it, but they don't like to have everything in its place. They like to run around freely exploring what could be possible. And you put these two people together who may be at the same level within an organization, or one may be the manager from another department or the other, and this is where the problems happen. And the problem happens then because they come together and they're not able to communicate in a productive way, and they're not able to explain their needs, but also they're not able to appreciate the needs and the challenges of the other person. And this is where both just try and explain their own needs, and that is not good use of anyone's time, because they're very rarely going to listen to what's being told to them. I mean, Covey, perfect example, seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? And I think this is the challenge that we have for people who are ND. Often you've been told for so long around what your problems are, around what your challenges are, why you're not good at this, why you're not good at that, why you can't do this, that you mask. And then when you come to the point where you need to advocate for yourself and stand up for yourself, you really struggle to do it, because you can no longer see your own strengths, or you can no longer fully understand where you add value. And this may not be all your life. This may be a moment in your life, because somebody has stripped the value out of you. Somebody has taken away the confidence that you may have had at one moment. Somebody's taken the joy out of your life. Or you've allowed people to put barriers in front of you that have meant the joy, the energy, the strength that you've been able to see maybe at one point is gone. And that then means that when this moment comes where two people come together, if you can't advocate for yourself, the person's going to think that you have no value. And if they think they have no value and they're a manager or they need to work with you, they're either going to go over you, right? They're going to walk over you because you're just going to get in their way, or they're going to get rid of you, or they're going to go to somebody else and explain how much little value you have. The case is not you don't have value. It's that you've had so much kryptonite in your life that you've not fully understood the impact that kryptonite has on you, your mental health, your well-being, your feeling of self-worth and self-value. It diminishes your ability to be able to see yourself as having value. And I think that's where we need to step in to help individuals. And that's individuals who may be at a point of crisis. And that's issues that we have with mental health and well-being now, significantly impacting the ND community, especially after the last few years that we've gone through. But we also then need to support those individuals to be able to communicate some of what they're feeling to people in roles of responsibility and power. So I actually truly believe that we can't just go and educate managers to better understand the individuals. We need to empower the individual to better advocate for themselves, because for too many years, and I understand this from my own lived experience, for too many years, you can believe the rhetoric, you can believe what people say about you, you can buy into it, and that diminishes your sense of self and self-worth, and that can create greater masking. And when you get the opportunity to grab something with both hands, you don't, through fear of what that might mean. And I think that is why, you can't just put it into a autism at work project. We can't just say we're going to train the managers. We can't just say it's one simple mechanism. I absolutely agree. It is around wider understanding, appreciation, to lower the barriers to stigma and to people being system impacted and marginalized, to your point, not just because of the way that they think, but the wide variety of other reasons that people effectively discriminate against other human beings.
Yeah, the intersectionality portion.
Yes,
you can belong to multiple groups at the same time, and if you are probably in America a woman of color that is ND is they got a lot of chances cut off that you or me as a white male would not be facing. So it stacks
Absolutely.
up as you add these together, for sure.
And that's where we can make significant impact. And, it's no surprise that Amanda Kirby, who I wrote the book with, she does a lot of work within prison service in the UK. And these stats, I was aware of, there's been a lot of research, but Amanda has her own data to back it up that's relevant today. She's extracted that data today that backs up the fact around 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 prisoners at ADHD. And, 80% of them are illiterate, right? So already the mountain is high to climb in terms of getting back into society. And people I've interviewed in the past who talk about the loser's loop, right? Once you're in that loser's loop, it's really difficult to get out. But then you put it in the context of being neurodiverse or neurodivergent, depending on your preference terminology, what was your
neurodistinct? Because I think all of us humans want to be distinct, but most of us, I don't know. I've never wanted to be divergent in my life.
No. Same here. And I don't. And people will argue about the diversity. But let's just say ND for the sake of argument, because
exactly that fits anything. You can put in the one you feel most comfortable with.
Yeah. ND, and you pick the one that it goes with. So ND people, when we look at the data and stats, are disproportionately effective in all areas of their lives because of all the stuff that we're talking about, the stigma and marginalization, and the struggle with kind of really understanding how oneself fits into this world that we live in. That, let's be honest, it's a new place for us all. The globalization, digitization of the way that we work, the way that we live, the way that we interact, the effects of war, the effects of COVID, of illness, the effects of not believing in them or believing them, the effects of politics. And we just think about all those things. And then, whatever else you have to deal with in like this is a significant impacting factor to our ability to have good levels of mental health and well-being that ensure that we're productive and that allow us to turn up to be our productive selves. I won't say our authentic selves in work, because maybe we're just not ready for that. And maybe work's not ready for that. And not everybody wants to hear how bad we're feeling every day. If we're feeling, but we might only want to share that with the small group that want to share how bad they feel, right? Because that's the safe place where you can explore it. But I truly believe we're in a period of time where there is significant opportunity if organizations are willing to truly embrace this concept. But they have to think about it beyond just a piece of training, beyond just a piece of recruitment. They have to think about it holistically as part of their people strategy. And if they can start to think about it in that context, I think they really start to get the opportunity that they have in their hands that others are yet to really grab hold of in any meaningful way. But I say the next 12 to 24 months, you'll see organizations really rapidly shifting in a positive sense because they've got it and they want to do something about it.
As happens more often than not here in Life in the Neurotypical Universe, Theo Smith and I had more to chat about than made sense to put into one episode. Well, this is the end of episode 1. It's not the end of the conversation with Theo. Please tune in and check out episode 2, where you can hear the rest of our conversation as Theo and I discuss various aspects of neurodiversity, being an advocate, and just general things about the world. Tune on in, and we'll see you in episode 2. We hope that you've enjoyed another episode of Life in a Neurotypical Universe. Please, if you enjoyed this, share it with your friends. Go take their phone and subscribe them. Heck, it will help us all out. If you want to know more about neurodiversity or have any questions for me, you can reach me at my website, timgoldstein.com, where I'll be more than glad to help you as best I can to navigate through the neurotypical universe.